everyone, welcome back. I'm Melissa Pineda, and today I will be discussing Virgil's epic poem called the Aeneid. So in my previous reviews of the Iliad and the Odyssey, I mentioned that I would be doing this review too. So this review is kind of like a follow-up to my previous one because they're all interconnected. So Virgil, his poem is sort of like the continuation in a way of the Iliad and the Odyssey. So before I begin though, if there's anything today that you find interesting or that you like, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And why listen to my review of Virgil? Well, to be quite honest, unless you're a huge history buff or you're studying this at school, you're probably not going to read the Aeneid. It is a very intense ancient Roman poem. And it is, to be quite honest, really difficult to read and understand. I'm not going to pretend like I understood everything I read. I didn't. I understood that I was missing a lot because, for one, there's a lot that's lost in translation. And secondly, it's just you know enough sometimes to know how much you don't know. But there's a lot there that it's incredible because if you're like me and love the Iliad and the Odyssey, you're just dying to hear anything else about this. So who was Virgil? Virgil was an ancient Roman poet. He lived approximately 70 to 19 BCE, before Christ. And so he was a famous poet at this time, and he wanted to write a poem, or he was rather commissioned to write one for the Roman Emperor Augustus at this time. And so it was interesting because the Romans were obsessed with the Greeks. Like the Greeks had everything, right? Had the stories, had the history, the culture, the civilization, everything. They were to be emulated. And so what Virgil wanted to do was write a poem modeled essentially on Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey, basically to celebrate Rome, to give Rome a history like that of Greece's history. So the Aeneid was basically written to glorify Roman history. And what it did, it was really cool, is that Virgil wrote this story whereby he links Emperor Augustus to the gods. So there's like this lineage that he draws there, and he creates his poem and he cuts it in half, and the first half is modeled on Odysseus's journey home, and the second half is modeled on like the fight for his homeland, which would be like the Iliad. So the Aeneid is the name of the poem, and Aeneas is the name of the main character. And so when I mentioned that it's sort of like a continuation of the Iliad and the Odyssey, it is in a way, obviously not by Homer, but Virgil talks about what happened after Troy. So in his story, there's a survivor of Troy, and it's Aeneas. So Aeneas survives Troy, and the way he survives it is cool, is the ghost of Hector. So if you recall, if you don't, then just check out my previous reviews on the Iliad and the Odyssey. But Hector is the son of King Priam, the king of Troy. So Hector was a prince, and he fought Paris's battle. So Paris had fallen in love with Helen of Sparta, who became Helen of Troy, and the whole war was waged for her. And so Hector ends up fighting Achilles, who was fighting on behalf of the Greeks. Achilles killed Hector, and so the ghost of Hector comes and warns Aeneas to leave the city. And he leaves with his father and leaves with his wife and his child, and his wife ends up not making it out of the city. So this is the main character of Virgil's Aeneid. And what Virgil does in this epic poem is he traces the lineage. So Aeneas is basically a demigod. So his one parent was immortal, the other one was a god, and then after him, lineage-wise, come Romulus and Remus, who were basically like the founders of Rome, and the two twin brothers, and there's a whole history there. And Romulus and Remus are also demigods. And so they were the legendary twin founders of Rome, right? And there's the whole story where the mother wolf raised them, and so Romulus ended up killing Remus. So the whole founding of the city of Rome was essentially based on fratricide. And then comes Augustus, who's a descendant of Romulus and Remus and a descendant of Aeneas. And so it establishes sort of Augustus's demigod status in the history of Rome, basically his divine lineage. So Aeneas in this poem is essentially depicted as a man who is torn between wishing he had died with honor in Troy and hating the fact that he's like the only survivor, and knowing that he has to fulfill a duty, which is basically to be the founder of Rome. And Aeneas is depicted as this character that, of course, has all the moral virtues of a Roman, who has an obligation to the gods, to his family, to honor, and to put kind of personal desires aside for the greater good, for his family, for his country, and for the gods. It's pretty cool to read it after the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so I'm going to leave it there for now. There's a lot more that I could say about it. So if you haven't read any of them, I would suggest Iliad, Odyssey, and then attempt to tackle this one. I've linked where you can get it in the description. All right, so thank you so much for listening, and until next time.